Hello, Mark. My name's Leslie Hu Rongxin. My student number is 30. I'm a freshman. The title of the speech is Everything You Think You Know About Addiction is Wrong by Johann Hari. One of my earliest memories is of trying to wake up one of my relatives and not being able to. And I was just a little kid, so I didn't really understand why. But as I got older, I realized we had drug addiction in my family, including lead cocaine addiction. I've been thinking about it a lot lately, partly because it is now actually 100 years since drugs were first banned in the United States and Britain, and we then imposed that on the rest of the world. It's a century since we made this really fateful decision to take addicts and punish them and make them suffer, because we believe that would deter them. It would give them an incentive to stop. And a few years ago, I was looking at some of the addicts in my life who I love, and trying to figure out if there was some way to help them. And I realized there were lots of incredibly basic questions I just didn't know the answer to, like what really causes addiction? Why do we carry on with this approach that doesn't seem to be working? And is there a better way out there that we could try instead? So I read lots of stuff about it, and I couldn't really find the answers I was looking for. So I thought, okay, I'll go and sit with different people around the world who live this and study this and talk to them and see if I could learn from them. And I didn't realize I would end up going over 30,000 miles at the start. But I ended up going and meeting lots of different people, from a transgender crack dealer in Bronxville, Brooklyn, to a scientist who spent a lot of time feeding hallucinogens to mongooses to see if they like them. It turned out they do, but only in very specific circumstances. To the only country that's ever decriminalized all drugs, from cannabis to crack, Portugal. And the thing I realized that really blew my mind is almost everything we think we know about addiction is wrong. And if we start to absorb the new evidence about addiction, I think we're going to have a change a lot more than our drug policies. But let's start with what we think we know, what I thought I knew. Let's think about this middle row here. Imagine all of you for 20 days now went off and used heroin 3 times a day. Some of you look a little more enthusiastic than others at this prospect. Laughter. Don't worry, it's just a thought experiment. Imagine you did that right. What would happen? Now we have a story about what would happen that we've been taught for a century. We think because there are chemical hooks in heroin, as you took it for a while, your body would become dependent on those hooks. You'll start to physically need them. And at the end of those 20 days, we'll all be heroin addicts, right? That's what I thought. First thing that alerted me to the fact that something's not right with this story is when it was explained to me. If I stay out of this TED Talk today and I get hit by a car and I break my hip, I'll be taken to hospital and I'll be given lots of diamorphine. Diamorphine is heroin. It's actually much better heroin than you are going to buy on the streets, because the stuff you buy from a drug dealer is contaminated. Actually, very little of it is heroin, whereas the stuff you get from the doctor is medically pure, and you have been given it for quite a long period of time. There are lots of people in this room. You may not realize it. You've taken quite a lot of heroin, and anyone who is watching this anywhere in the world, this is happening. And if what we believe about addiction is right, Those people are exposed to all those chemical hooks. What should happen? They should become addicts. This has been studied really carefully. It doesn't happen. You would have noticed if your grandmother had a hip replacement. She didn't come out as a junkie. Laughter. And when I learned this, it seemed so weird to me. So contrary to everything I've been taught, everything I thought I knew, I just thought it couldn't be right. Until I met a man called Bruce Alexander. He's a professor of psychology in Vancouver who carried out an incredible experiment I think really helped us to understand this issue. Professor Alexander explained to me the idea of addiction we all got in our heads. That story comes partly from a series of experiments that were done earlier in the 20th century. They're really simple. You can do them tonight at home if you feel a little sadistic. You get a rat and you put it in a cage, and you give it 2 water bottles. One is just water, and the other is water laced with either heroin or cocaine. If you do that, the rat will almost always prefer the drug water and almost always kill itself quite quickly. So there you go, right? That's how we think it works. In the 70s, Professor Alexander comes along and he looks at this experiment and he noticed something. He said, we are putting the rat in an empty cage. It's got nothing to do except use these drugs. Let's try something different. So Professor Alexander built a cage that he called Rat Park, which is basically heaven for rats. They got loads of cheese, they got loads of color balls, they got loads of tunnels. Crucially, they got lots of friends. They can have lots of sex, and they got both the water bottles, the normal water, and the drugged water. And here's the fascinating thing. In Rat Park, they don't like the drug water. They almost never use it. None of them ever use it compulsively. None of them ever overdose. You go for almost 100% overdose when they're isolated to 0% overdose when they have happy and connected lives. Now when he first saw this, Professor Alexander thought, maybe this is just a thing about rats that's quite different to us. Maybe not as different as we like, but fortunately, there was a human experiment into the exact same principle happening at the exact same time. It was called the Vietnam War. In Vietnam, 20% of all American troops were using lots of heroin, and if you look at the news reports from the time, they were really worried because they thought, my God, we are going to have hundreds of thousands of junkies on the streets of the United States when the war ends. It made total sense. Now, those soldiers who were using lots of heroin were followed home. The archives of General Psychiatry did a really detailed study. And what happened to them? It turns out they didn't go to rehab. They didn't go into withdrawal. 95% of them just stopped. Now, if you believe the story about chemical hooks, that makes absolutely no sense. But Professor Alexander began to think there might be a different story about addiction. He said, what if addiction isn't about your chemical hooks? What if addiction is about your cage? What if addiction is an adaptation to your environment? Looking at this, there was another professor called Peter Johann in the Netherlands who said, maybe we shouldn't even call it addiction. Maybe we should call it bonding. Human beings have a natural and innate need to bond, and when we are happy and healthy, we'll bond and connect with each other. But if you can't do that because you are traumatized or isolated or beaten down by life, You were born with something that will give you some sense of relief. Now that might be gambling, that might be pornography, that might be cocaine, that might be cannabis. And you were born and connect with something because that's our nature. That's what we want as human beings. And at first, I found this quite a difficult thing to get my head around. But one way that helped me to think about it is I can see. I got over by my seat a bottle of water, right? I'm looking at lots of you, and lots of you have bottles of your water with you. Forget the drugs, forget the drug war, totally legally. All of those bottles of water could be bottles of vodka, right? We could all be getting drunk. I might after this, laughter, but we're not. Now because you've been able to afford the approximately gazillion pounds that it costs to get into a TED Talk. I'm guessing you guys could afford to be drinking vodka for the next 6 months. You wouldn't end up homeless. You're not going to do that. And the reason you're not going to do that is not because anyone's stopping you. It's because you've got bonds and connections that you want to be present for. You've got work you love, you got people you love, you got healthy relationship. And a core part of addiction, I came to think that I believe the evidence suggests it's about not being able to bear to be present in your life. Now, it has really significant implications. The most obvious implications are for the war on drugs. In Arizona, I went out with a group of women who were made to wear t-shirts saying I was a drug addict and go out on chain gangs and dig graves while members of the public jeer at them. And when those women get out of the prison, they're going to have criminal records that mean they'll never work in the legal economy again. Now that's a very extreme example. Obviously, in the case of the chain gang, but actually almost everywhere in the world we treat addicts to some degree like that. We punish them, we shame them, we give them criminal records, we put barriers between them reconnecting. There was a doctor in Canada, Dr. Garber met, an amazing man, who said to me if you wanted us to design a system that would make addiction worse, you would design that system. Now there's a place that decided to do the exact opposite, and I went there to see how it worked. In the year 2000, Portugal had one of the worst drug problems in Europe. 1% of the population was addicted to heroin, which is kind of mind-blowing, and every year they try the American way more and more. They punish people and stigmatize them and shame them more, and every year the problem got worse. And one day, the prime minister and the leader of the opposition got together and basically said, look, we can go on with a country where we're having ever more people becoming heroin addicts. Let's set up a panel of scientists and doctors to figure out what would generally solve the problem. And they set up a panel led by an amazing man called Dr. Joel Golar to look at all this new evidence, and they came back and they said, decriminalize all drugs from cannabis to crack, but, and this is the crucial next step, take all the money we used to spend on cutting addicts off, on disconnecting them, and spend instead on reconnecting them with society. And that's not really what we think of as drug treatment in the United States and Britain. So they do residential rehab, they do psychological therapy. That does have some value. But the biggest thing they did was the complete opposite of what we do, a mass program of job creation of addicts and microloans for addicts to set up small businesses. So say you used to be a mechanic. When you are ready, they'll go to your garage and they'll say, if you are employing this guy for a year, we'll pay half his wage. The goal was to make sure that every addict in Portugal had something to get out of the bed for in the morning. And when I went and met the addicts in Portugal, what they said is, as they rediscovered purpose, they rediscovered bonds and relationship with the wider society. It will be for 15 years this year since that experiment began, and the results are in injecting drug use is down in Portugal, according to the British Journal of Criminology by 15%. 50%. Overdose is amazingly down. HIV is massively down among addicts. Addiction in every study is significantly down. One of the ways you know it works so well is that almost nobody in Portugal wants to go back to the old system. Now that's the political implications. I actually think there's a layer of implication to all this research below that. We live in a culture where people feel really increasingly vulnerable to all sorts of addictions, whether it's to their smartphones or to shopping or to eating. Before these talks began, you guys know this. We are taught we're alone to have our smartphones on, and I have to say, a lot of you look an awful lot like addicts who were told their dealer was going to be unavailable for the next couple of hours. Laughter. Let a lot of us feel like that. And it might sound weird to say, I've been talking about how disconnection is a major driver of addiction and weird to say it's growing. Because you think we're the most connected society that's ever been. Surely. But I increasingly began to think that the connections we have or think we have are like a kind of parody or human connection. If you have a crisis in your life, you'll notice something. It won't be your Twitter followers who come to sit with you. It won't be your Facebook friends who help you turn it around. It will be your flesh and blood friends who you have deep and nonsense and textures, face-to-face relationships with. And there's a study I learned about from Bill McCabe, the environmental writer, that I think tells us a lot about this. It looked at the number of close friends the average American believes they can call on in a crisis. That number has been declining steadily since the 1950s. The amount of floor space an individual has in their home has been steadily increasing, and I think that's like a metaphor for the choice we made as a culture. We are traded for space for friends, we are traded to stop for connections, and the result is we are one of the loneliest societies that there have ever been. Ambrose Alexander, the guy who did the Red Park experiment, says, we talk all the time in addiction about individual recovery, and it's right to talk about that, but we need to talk much more about society recovery. Something gone wrong with us, not just with individuals, but as a group. And we've created a society where, for a lot of us, life looks a whole lot more like that in solitary cage and a whole lot less like Red Park. If I'm honest, this isn't why I went into it. I didn't go into the discover the political stuff, the social stuff. I wanted to know how to help the people I love. And when I came back from this long journey and I did learn about this, I look at the addicts in my life. And if you're really convict, it's hard loving an addict. And there's going to be lots of people who know in this room. You are angry and a lot of the time. And I think one of the reasons why this debate is so charged is because it runs through the heart of each of us, right? Everyone has a bit of them that looks at an addict and thinks, I wish someone would just stop you. And the kind of scripts we taught for how to deal with the addicts in our lives is typified by, I think, the reality show intervention. If you guys have ever seen it, I think everything in our life is defined by reality TV. But that's another TED Talk. If you ever seen the show Intervention, it's a pretty simple premises. Get an addict or the people in their life, gathering them together, confront them with what they're doing. And they say if you don't shut up, we are going to cut you off. So what they do is they take the connection to the addict and they tune in. They make a connection on the addict behaving the way they want. And I began to think, I began to see what approach doesn't work. And I began to think that's almost like the importing of the logic of the drug world into our private lives. So I was thinking, how would I be Portuguese? And what I try to do now, and I can tell you I do it consistently, and I can tell you it's easy, is to say to addicts in my life that I want to deepen the connection with them, to say to them, I love you whether you are using or you're not. I love you whether you're state you are in, and if you need me, I will come and sit with you because I love you and I don't want you to be alone or to feel alone. And I think the core of that message, you are not alone, we love you, has to be at every level of how we respond to addicts, society, politically and individually. For 100 years now, we have been singing war songs about addicts. I think all along we should have been singing love songs to them, because the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. Thank you, applause. Thank you, Mark.